Are biometrics currently being used in any mobile apps?
Well, interestingly, there's a number of mobile apps that are being used by the military in the Middle East that collect biometrics on policemen or criminals, all kinds of different people. The system's called the Seek and the Hide from different companies that collect irises and fingerprints and all kinds of things. In the U.S., we used to have fingerprint sensors on some of the HP PDAs, the iPads.
I remember that, yeah.
But they stopped doing that, and I think the reason that they stopped doing that is that there's not really an application for it. Most people don't even put a PIN or a password on their smartphone itself, so there's no real need to protect it with another layer of biometrics.
Sure.
If you look at some of the applications for biometrics, you can use it to authenticate and identify people and things like that, and some of those applications are starting to come out. But in terms of securing the device itself, you just don't see it. I just don't think that there's an actual application that people want to do with that.
From a surveillance standpoint, do you think that the sensors within the mobile devices that we have will actually leapfrog some of the biometric stuff?
Yeah, I think you see that all over the place. The Army right now is doing a huge push to develop Android apps, for example, instead of having custom hardware built. I think the general purpose hardware always wins out over the special purpose hardware. We actually have an application working now with police to use a regular smartphone camera to identify people who are trying to hide their identity.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. So so the sensors that are in there, there's a couple of people trying to work to do iris identification using a smartphone camera as well. And it's just that general purpose hardware. It's so wide, it's so ubiquitous, and everybody has it. That wins out over the special purpose hardware that's out there.
So expanding this a little bit, is there an upside to surveillance society?
It's an interesting question. Scott Adams, the guy who does Dilbert, had an interesting blog post about a couple of weeks ago, and he came up with this concept of no privacyville. And it was basically sort of a thought experiment of, you live in a society where nothing is private, every single thing is public. And he talks about all the different things benefits that you have out of that. Crime is lower. Insurance is more fairly priced. You can know what you need to buy at the grocery store, and it's interesting. I think there's a lot of complicated things that come into that, but the central question about that is, it ends up being sort of a commerce kind of thing. Are you willing to pay, with your privacy in exchange for actual money? For example, a lot of insurance companies, or some insurance companies now will say, well, we'll install a GPS tracker on your car in exchange for lowering your insurance rate by 30%.
Okay.
And if you're just going to drive safely, that may be a fine thing, and you don't care, but then it comes down to what do they do with the data and everything else. So I think the problem with a lot of those arguments, though, is that you end up getting in this realm where people don't actually see that privacy is something that needs to be valued and everything else. But so, there's all these little trade-offs. Is giving up my location of Foursquare versus worthwhile to get the restaurant recommendations or things like that. So there are lots of little benefits. I think in the long run, it's an overall negative, though, because you don't know how all this data is going to be used. My insurance company is giving me a better rate right now, but what if they get subpoenaed, in the case of a divorce or something like that,
Right.
Yeah.
So last question I have for you. Are there companies or organizations whose data acquisition policy should be emulated?
I think it's really apropos of the stuff with Apple, that went on here recently. In my mind, it's all about, transparency and accountability. The thing with Apple, for example, and the data that they were collecting on the device isn't really all that remarkable. I mean, from a software developer standpoint, the fact that they're collecting this diagnostic data isn't a big deal. The big deal is that they didn't say anything about it. And, now that, it came out, they haven't been talking about it at all. And that, to me, is the most troubling thing about that. So I think the problem I see with all the companies that are out there is they're kind of hiding behind a veil of obfuscation. They have all these legal documents about what they retain and things that are very difficult to read. So right now, no, I can't say that there's a particular company that I would say, yeah, this is the model.
Sure.
But if anybody, Google is probably the cleanest, but they're definitely not the great model either. So,
Well, thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.